I stood on the parade field at Fort Benning in the heavy Georgia heat, my dress blues pressed so sharply they felt like armor against the world, the sunlight bouncing off brass buttons and polished black shoes. The flags around the reviewing stand snapping in a warm breeze that smelled faintly of pine and red clay. I had imagined this moment since I was a girl staring at the river in Savannah and telling myself that one day I would find a life where respect was earned by effort and character instead of fear and obedience. Commissioning Day, May 2024. My name waiting to be called with ceremony and honor. My voice ready to speak the oath that would bind me to something bigger than the Dawson household and the quiet dread that lived inside it. The Army band played softly in the distance, a steady patriotic heartbeat, and rows of families leaned forward with pride glowing in their eyes. Somewhere to my right, I saw a veteran in a wheelchair lift his chin, proud and solemn, his chest covered with ribbons from a lifetime of service. I wondered if he knew how much strength his presence gave young officers like me. Then my gaze found the faces that had never offered me strength. My father Harold, arms crossed tight, as if holding himself together by spite alone, eyes narrowed like my success was an insult carved into the morning air. Beside him, my stepmother Marla sat stiff and stone-faced, her pearls gleaming like armor for vanity rather than dignity. My cousin Tyler slouched behind them, with a grin he wore every time he expected me to fail. They had not come for pride. They had come to watch. They had come to measure me against every cruel word they had planted over the years. You will never be military material. Military is for real leaders. Women belong in kitchens, not uniforms. I heard those words whispered in my head the way soldiers hear their drill sergeants in dreams. But I stood straighter. I breathed slowly. I had survived their home. I would survive this moment too. My name echoed across the speakers. Second Lieutenant Avery Dawson. My heart felt like a drum, steady but fierce. I stepped forward and every training march from ROTC at the University of Georgia replayed in my muscles. Heel, toe, chin high, a soldier, not a scared daughter, not a burden. Then I saw him, Colonel Richard Hayes, retired, Medal of Honor recipient. His silver hair bright in the sun, his posture straight despite age, his eyes holding the weight of sacrifice and dignity. He had shaken my hand at an ROTC banquet once and told me that grit mattered more than comfort. I carried those words like dog tags around my heart. As I approached, he nodded, and it felt like validation from every veteran who had ever believed in the next generation of service. I lifted my hand to salute. In that single second, the world slowed. The sound of the band faded. The breeze felt like a prayer across my cheek. This was the moment I was not supposed to reach, the moment they said I would never deserve. I rose into it anyway, and then everything shattered. A shout tore across the field, a sound I knew too well. My father, angry, raw, accusing me of worshiping strangers instead of respecting blood. His footsteps thundered. Before I could turn fully, his hand clamped around my wrist and twisted with a force fueled not by love, but by long, festering resentment. I heard a crack, sharp. Wrong. Pain shot up my arm like fire, and my vision pulsed white. Gasps rippled across the stands. A woman near the front covered her mouth, eyes wide. Someone whispered, "Dear Lord." I stumbled but refused to fall fully. I had fallen enough in my life. I steadied myself with my good arm, breath sharp and shaking. Colonel Hayes caught my shoulder with a steady hand, his eyes flashing with something between fury and sorrow. And then another voice rose, commanding, unmistakable, a general. Later I would learn it was General Robert Whitaker. 3-star command. TRADOC. His voice cut the stunned silence like a blade of authority. You just assaulted a United States Army officer on federal ground. Military police moved instantly. Boots against pavement, hands guiding my father back. He struggled, shouting things I will never repeat, words that tried to pull me back into the life I fought so hard to escape. But something in me had already crossed a threshold. Tears blurred my vision not from pain, though it burned like a brand, but from the quiet breaking of a chain I had carried since childhood. I did not have to pretend anymore. I did not have to protect his ego or hide his rage or carry the blame he forced on me. As the MPs secured him and murmurs rose like judgment from every corner of the field, I stood straighter. My wrist throbbed. My heart steadied. For the first time in my life, I was not shrinking to survive. I was standing to live, and somewhere deep inside, a truth rose like the flag above us in the morning sun. I was not his to break, and this time the world had seen it happen in broad daylight, and there was no going back. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, where the air always smelled like salt and marsh water, and the moss hung from ancient oaks like tired soldiers refusing to fall. The tourists loved it. Horse carriages, pastel homes, soft southern drawls drifting through squares named after generals long gone. But for me, it was never gentle. My world was not the romantic South people imagine in magazines. My house on Whitfield Avenue held a different kind of history, the kind carved into bruises hidden under sleeves and whispers spoken through locked doors. My father, Harold, worked down at the port as a ship rigger, hands always calloused voice, always rough from shouting over cranes and engines. When I was little, I thought his strength meant safety. Then I got old enough to understand strength can be a weapon if held by the wrong man. Every night he came home with the same tired boots and the same bottle of wild turkey tucked under his arm like a loyal friend. He would slam the door, crack the seal, and sink into that recliner like the world had wronged him just by waking him up in the morning. And every night I braced myself. There are two sounds I will never forget from childhood: the clink of ice dropping into his glass and the long, slow inhale he took before deciding whether he would be quiet angry or loud angry. After Mom died when I was 10, that inhale became a storm warning. The accident took her fast a truck on a rain-slick road, but grief did not come fast for him. Instead, it crawled in and settled like mold in the walls. He looked at me at the funeral with eyes that had once softened for me and asked why I did not beg her to stay home that morning, as if a child could bargain with fate, as if I killed her. He never said it directly again, but he did not need to. It lived in every silence after. It lived in the way he shoved my plate a little harder across the table, or the way his voice cut when he said my full name, Avery Marie Dawson, like I was a burden he could not set down. The day after the funeral, he locked me in my room because I cried too loudly. He said grief should be quiet, dignified, unlike me. And when I begged to come out, he pressed his palm against the door and told me to be grateful he did not send me away with my mother. I learned then that love can twist into cruelty when someone cannot carry their own pain. I learned to swallow my voice before he could silence it. I learned to breathe through fear without letting it show. Some girls grew up learning how to braid hair and whisper secrets at sleepovers. I learned how to stand still and not flinch when footsteps approached. At school, things were not kinder. Children smell weakness like wolves scenting blood. Lincoln Harris, tall even at 12, decided I was his personal target. He would smack books from my arms, call me ghost girl because my face always looked drained from late nights. Tell others I thought I was better than them because I answered questions in class. One day he cornered me behind the bleachers and shoved me so hard my elbow skinned raw against the concrete. I went home with blood crusted on my sleeve, and Dad asked why I was clumsy. That night, I sat in my room staring at that red smear, and I made a choice. I would not be anyone's target again. So I found an old YouTube video on basic boxing stance. I pushed my dresser aside at night. I learned how to tuck my chin and keep my hands up. My knuckles bruised, pressing into pillows as makeshift pads. I could not control my father, but I could control how I took a hit, and eventually how I gave one. Still, no matter how many jabs I threw in the dark or how many push-ups I did to feel strong, the house did not soften. If I forgot to fold laundry fast enough, he made me kneel on uncooked rice in the pantry for an hour. If I spoke back even slightly, he would tell me to hold a stress position, arms above my head until my shoulders trembled. He called it discipline. I called it survival training long before the Army ever would. The nights were the worst. When the TV flickered blue light on his face and the bottle ran low, he would ramble about how my mother would still be alive if I had been a better daughter, a quieter daughter, a daughter who did not dream of things beyond our street. And when he fell asleep on the couch, I would creep to my window and stare at the lights across the marsh and promise myself I would leave. Some children imagined castles. I imagined barracks. I watched recruitment ads with officers standing tall and confident, and something inside me ached. They moved with purpose, spoke with certainty, wore uniforms like armor that protected them from the world. I wanted that. I wanted discipline order, something that did not depend on the mood of a drunk man. At 13, I cut out a picture of a female officer from a magazine and taped it to the inside of my closet where he could not find it. Every morning before school, I looked at her sharp salute and whispered a vow. One day, I would stand like that. One day, I would earn a place where respect was real and not bargained with fear. By high school, I kept my grades perfect. Not because he cared, but because each A felt like laying another brick in the road out of that house. I joined JROTC freshman year. The uniform was stiff, the boots borrowed, but when I stood in formation for the first time, something inside me settled. My instructor retired. Sergeant Daly told me I had posture like someone who had learned to brace against storms. He was not wrong. That class gave me a glimpse of who I could become if I escaped. So I applied for an ROTC scholarship at the University of Georgia with the desperation of someone throwing a rope over a prison wall. And when the acceptance letter arrived, I did not cheer. I closed my bedroom door and sank to the floor, shaking with relief. Leaving Savannah was not just about education, it was oxygen after years underwater. The night before I moved, Dad sat at the table with that same half-empty bottle and asked who would take care of him now. I told him he was capable. He told me not to embarrass him. That was his goodbye. I drove to Athens with everything I owned in one duffel and a heart held together by a single fragile truth. I had survived my childhood by staying silent. But silence was no longer my shield. It was my scar. I carried it with me into ROTC training like a quiet vow. I learned to march, to lead, to speak commands loud and clear. Every step I took on that parade field at UGA was a step away from the girl locked in her room, trying not to cry. Every certificate, every early morning run, every salute practiced under stadium lights felt like building a new spine, one brick at a time. People saw discipline. They did not see the cost. But I did. And each time, doubt whispered that I did not belong. I remembered kneeling on rice with my palms flat on the ground, and I repeated the truth I built my life around. I did not endure pain to stay quiet. I endured it to rise. I learned to survive in silence, so one day I could speak with strength. That day was coming. I could feel it like sunrise through fog. The first morning I stood on the drill field at the University of Georgia, the sky was still purple with dawn, and Sanford Stadium loomed like a silent giant behind us, a place where crowds cheered strength even when they did not know the battles fought to earn it. The air tasted like dew and clay and ambition, and as cadence calls echoed across the quiet campus, I felt my lungs fill with something that was not fear for the first time in years. ROTC was nothing like high school. Here, discipline was currency, leadership was earned, not demanded, and every step I took in those stiff boots reminded me that I was building a life brick by brick under the Georgia morning sun. Captain Reynolds led PT with the intensity of a man who believed every push-up forged character, every sprint could break excuses before they were born. He was stern and spare with praise, the kind of officer whose silence meant more than someone else's compliment, and I watched the way cadets straightened when he walked by like he carried gravity in his stride. Suffering under him felt clean, unlike suffering at home, which always left shame clinging to my ribs. Morning runs cut through campus past the stadium lights still glowing from the night before, and the fountain at Myers Quad, where students who were not yet awake could never imagine cadets gasping through formation runs, chanting cadence about grit and honor at 6 a.m. The first friend I made was Mia Rodriguez, sharp like a blade hidden in velvet, with eyes that missed nothing and a way of talking like she was solving invisible puzzles in the air. She came from a military family in Marietta. Her father, a quiet retired sergeant who served 3 tours, and when she asked me about home, I learned how to answer without answering, deflecting with humor until she stopped pressing. The second was James Carter from Augusta, tall and steady, the kind of guy who never bragged but always volunteered first during ruck marches, the kind who said little but made you feel safer just standing beside him. We pushed each other, competed, quietly laughed through blisters and field rations and mandatory study halls. College kids around us chased tailgates and fraternity spots, but we chased something else, something harder and sharper, a future measured not in parties but in salutes and stars. Still, there were cracks in my armor. Some nights after lights out, I lay in my dorm bunk staring at the dark ceiling, hearing my father's voice hiss in my memory that women do not belong in uniforms, and I clenched my jaw until the thoughts faded. Captain Reynolds noticed my stiffness one morning while correcting my rifle carry position. He paused, studied me with those steel eyes, then said barely above a whisper, "Pressure makes diamonds or dust?" Dawson, and walked on. That sentence carried me through more mornings than I can count. Physical training hardened us, but weapons training was where I felt my pulse roar to life. The smell of gun oil, the feel of cold steel, the crack of shots echoing across the Fort Benning qualification range during a weekend training event made me feel like I had stepped out of my past and into who I was meant to be. Then one Saturday, my father showed up unannounced. I still do not know how he knew where to go or why he came, but I saw him leaning against his truck near the firing line, arms crossed, whiskey bitterness clinging to him like a second skin, even in the morning air. Cadets glanced his way as if sensing danger, and when he saw me, he smirked like he had walked into a joke and I was the punchline. He waited until I finished a round, then raised his voice enough for the nearby cadre and cadets to hear, "Well, I'll be Avery holding a rifle, like she knows what she's doing. Guess they'll let anyone shoot these days." His laugh cut sharper than recoil. Captain Reynolds's face tightened, but he did not intervene. He let me handle it, maybe knowing that leadership begins with facing the ghosts that want you small. I swallowed, eyes straight ahead, muscles shaking not from the weapon but from the familiar humiliation rising up like bile. I kept my posture perfect, locked my emotions behind my ribs, and fired again, each round landing tight in the center like I was punching that voice out of my life. When I turned to clear my weapon, I caught James giving me a subtle nod. Not pity, just respect, and I breathed again. Dad left without waiting for me. He had proven his point, whatever it was. But I had proven mine too. That was the last time he ever bothered to show up. Over the next 2 years, I rose to the top of the platoon, earning evaluations that still feel unreal to me. During a joint field exercise, 2 visiting West Point instructors watched our squad navigate nightland navigation in the thick Georgia woods. Afterward, one of them pulled Captain Reynolds aside, and I overheard him say the Dawson girl has command presence. You can feel it before she speaks. Those words felt like a medal pinned silently to my chest. The first time I met Colonel Richard Hayes, retired, but still moving with the quiet precision of someone who once commanded lives and still carries the weight of them, was during a guest leadership seminar. He walked along the line of cadets, studying each face like he was reading chapters in a book only he could understand. When he reached me, he paused longer than the others. His eyes were steady, searching, and for a second I wondered if he could see every bruise from childhood etched behind my spine. He said quietly, not as praise, but as recognition, "You have the eyes of someone who endured storms and learned to stand anyway. Some never do." It was the closest thing to being seen that I had felt in years. Not praised, seen. After that day, I trained harder. Not to prove anything to my father or the ghosts of Savannah, but because someone who mattered had recognized the fight inside me. ROTC was sweat and exams and field leaders' course and nights writing operations orders while other students slept. It was learning to hold composure when sand filled my boots and hunger pulled at my stomach during rucks across campus hills. It was standing in front of younger cadets and teaching them rifle drills, feeling the strange new bloom of confidence when they followed my commands without hesitation. Leadership felt like breathing for the first time. College was not escape. It was transformation. And the more I grew, the more I understood the truth beating quietly beneath my discipline. I was not trying to run from the girl who knelt on rice in a pantry. I was building the woman who would never kneel like that again. ROTC did not just prepare me to serve. It prepared me to rise. And somewhere deep inside, I began to believe that a different life was possible. A life where respect was earned, not begged. A life where my voice had weight. A life where no one would ever break me again. That quiet hope settled deep and waited for its moment to be tested in the harshest light. That moment came on commissioning day, and the world would know who I had become, and the week before commissioning day moved like warm molasses, slow and thick and sweet with pride for almost everyone but me. My classmates buzzed about parents flying in, about dress uniform fittings, about futures already unfolding. Meanwhile, back in Savannah, the storm I thought I outgrew began building again, low and mean. It started when Harold somehow heard that Colonel Hayes had personally invited me to sit at the distinguished guest table after the ceremony. Most fathers might have glowed. Mine did what he always did when my accomplishments threatened the story he told himself about his own life. He turned mean. He called the night I got the invitation. His voice already gravelly, the slur tucked just under the edge like a blade wrapped in cloth. "So now you walk with big names, huh? Think you're better than your family now." I told him sitting with a retired colonel was an honor, not a throne. He laughed cold and ugly. "Honor? Don't talk to me about honor. Honor is coming home every day to feed your family, not parading around in a costume saluting strangers." Then Marla grabbed the phone. That voice still curls my stomach like spoiled milk. "You really think a man like that cares about you? You're just entertainment for men in shiny uniforms. They like seeing pretty girls pretend to be soldiers." I sat at my tiny off-campus desk, staring at my ROTC medals pinned above my bed, and I felt 15 again, holding an envelope of cash and knowing it would never buy love, only quiet. I hung up before she could finish, but her voice clung to me. The next day, during equipment turn in my hands, fumbled a buckle, and Captain Reynolds asked if I was all right. I told him just nerves. Truth was, that old shame was creeping up my spine again, the one that whispered maybe they were right. Maybe I was playing dress-up in a world built for people braver, better born into support instead of scraping it from discipline. That night, I walked past the dorm study room and saw Mia and James joking about who would mispronounce the oath first. They looked so free. I smiled for them, then went back to my room and sat on the floor staring at my commission papers. I should have felt proud. Instead, fear and resentment tangled in my chest. Pride was fragile when your roots grew in rot. Flashback after flashback came without mercy. The time, Harold threw the power bill on the counter and asked if the military would teach me how to pay real responsibilities. I had been 18 then, not even through my first semester already wiring half my scholarship stipend home, so the lights stayed on. 3 years straight, I paid for groceries, utilities, and half of his blood pressure medication because if I didn't, he would call me selfish. If I did, he called me a doormat. No correct answers, just different punishments. I remembered when his truck broke down and he made me drain my savings for it. He didn't say thank you. He tossed the keys across the table 3 days later and said, "You think you're helping, but you're just buying forgiveness for killing your mother." That memory hit like a punch to the solar plexus. I felt the old ache, the child in me still believing his verdict could be true. But I had spent 4 years learning to breathe through pain and stand anyway. Still, the closer the ceremony came, the more I felt the weight of them like hands on my shoulders, dragging me backwards toward the version of me that trembled. The day before, commissioning Harold and Marla drove up in his rusted Ford tires, crunching gravel like teeth grinding. They didn't tell me they were arriving early. I spotted them outside my barracks, as if fate wanted to test my composure one last time. He looked around campus like he was walking through a museum he didn't think deserved the funding. She squinted at cadets in formation like the sight of people with purpose offended her. When I approached, Marla smiled the way snakes mimic stillness before they strike. "So, where's the special officer table?" she asked, dripping sarcasm. "Going to sit next to the king of the army." Before I could answer, Harold stepped closer. His breath carried whiskey, though it was barely noon. "That's right, Avery. Don't go acting like you're something tomorrow. Remember where you come from. Remember who feeds you." I stood straighter than I felt. "I haven't taken $1 from you in years." His eyes narrowed. Money isn't the only thing parents give. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Not yet. That night was the longest night of my life. I stayed on base while they went to whatever motel would rent a room by the hour. Around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed, a voicemail. His voice already molten with resentment. You embarrass me tomorrow, and I swear, Avery, I swear you'll regret it. The crack in his tone was familiar. Threat disguised as paternal duty. I locked my door, then locked my bathroom door too. Muscle memory from childhood. Safety measured in layers. At 1 a.m., my hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline trapped with nowhere to go. So I put on my dress uniform jacket, let the fabric settle like armor over my frame, and stood in front of the mirror. The hallway was silent, lights low. I stood at attention and practiced my salute. Slow, precise fingers tight. Again, again, again. Each motion a promise to the little girl I used to be. You made it out. You earned this. This uniform belongs to you. At 2 a.m., my eyes burned and my wrist throbbed from repetitions, but I kept going. Not for him, for me. And for the moment, I would place my hand over my heart and speak words he could never break. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. I whispered it over and over until the shaking eased. Some people go to war overseas. Some go to war at home. I went to war in silence inside a dorm room lit by a single desk lamp, fighting the voice that tried to drag me back into the dark. I knew one thing for certain. Tomorrow I would walk across that field. Tomorrow I would salute the future I bled to reach. And if my father could not stand to see me rise, then he would fall alone. I learned long ago to endure pain quietly. Now I was learning to endure pride the same way. If surviving him was my battle, then claiming myself would be my victory. And by morning, victory felt close enough to touch. Fort Benning woke with the kind of heat that clung to the skin and settled into bone-thick Georgia air, pressing down like the sky itself wanted to test our resolve on the most important morning of our lives. Flags lined the parade field in perfect symmetry, snapping sharply in the warm breeze, red, white, and blue, cutting through sunlight like blade edges. The brass band tuned their notes, drifting solemn and proud, a heartbeat for the ceremony that would turn cadets into officers under the relentless southern sun. Families filled the bleachers. Proud parents clutching programs, veterans in wheelchairs with medals gleaming against pressed jackets. Younger siblings waving small flags. Old soldiers nodding in approval as they scanned faces that reminded them of themselves decades ago. My classmates smiled and stood tall, nerves humming like electricity through their posture. But beneath that pride sat something deeper, a reverence that came only when one understood how fragile the privilege of wearing this uniform truly is. Then I saw them, Harold and Marla walking toward the seating area. Harold's chin lifted like he owned the ground, Marla's sunglasses masking disdain she never bothered to hide. Tyler shuffled behind them, chewing gum like this was a football game, not a moment built by sacrifice and sweat and tears no one saw. He smirked when he caught my eye, then leaned toward me just enough to mutter, "You're going to mess up the oath watch," and I swallowed back the heat rising in my chest because anger was a weapon you never fired too early. Cadets whispered final reminders to each other, and I felt my palms grow damp inside white gloves as I scanned the field. And then the air shifted. Colonel Hayes entered first upright stance calm, but commanding medals, glinting presence grounding the field like bedrock. Behind him, General Robert Whitaker stepped forward. TRADOC Commander 3 stars gleaming like he carried the weight of the entire army on his shoulders and wore it with ease. Conversations hushed instantly. This was not ceremony background theater. This was history stepping into sunlight. When their eyes met mine briefly, something like gravity locked in place, not fear, but recognition. I stood straighter. My pulse beat against my collar like drums. Captain Reynolds passed by our formation, adjusting his cover with precise fingertips as the chaplain took his place at the podium and families leaned in quiet, settling like a held breath across the field. My father's voice floated sharply through the quiet, louder than he intended. All this for what? Just to say words anyone could memorize. Marla reached for his arm, but he jerked away, jaw clenched. He was not whispering. He wanted to be heard. Shame pricked my skin, but resolve wrapped around my ribs, steadying me. The master of ceremonies stepped forward and spoke our names one by one, each sound stretching across the hot air. Sunlight poured over my shoulders, baking through uniform fabric sweat, forming along my spine, but my posture did not falter. I had trained for this moment through storms life had thrown harder than heat. Then the oath began. We raised our right hands' voices, joining in one solemn current. I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States. My father muttered loud enough for those nearest to tilt their heads, worthless words, meaningless show. But my voice did not shake. It strengthened, against all enemies, foreign and domestic. My heart hammered, but clarity cut through every beat. This oath was not for him. It never was. It was for the girl who learned to kneel on rice without crying so she could one day stand here without fear. It was for the cadets beside me who earned every inch of this ground, and for the soldiers who never made it home to take this oath again. So help me God. Silence followed thick and reverent. Then applause rolled across the crowd like thunder breaking. We lowered our hands as officers, official, earned, real. My throat tightened, a mix of pride and disbelief, the way a person feels when a dream long starved finally tastes sunlight. And then it was time for individual recognition. One by one, we stepped forward when called, marching toward the podium under watchful eyes of generals, families, fellow cadets. When my name echoed through the speakers, the ground seemed to hum beneath my boots. Second Lieutenant Avery Dawson. Everything I had endured sharpened into a single point inside my chest. I stepped forward, each stride precise heels, striking pavement arms, cutting the air at perfect angles, head lifted, chin firm. I felt the weight of my uniform, the weight of expectation, the weight of my own history rising with each step. I approached the front row and saw Colonel Hayes watching with quiet pride etched into his features. General Whitaker stood beside him, posture regal, gaze unwavering. Behind them in the bleachers, Harold sat with his arms crossed, expression carved from bitterness. He leaned forward and hissed loud enough for nearby families to hear, "Don't embarrass me, girl." I kept walking. The heat burned down my collar, but cool determination pulsed through my veins. I reached the salute point, stopped, inhaled slow, and raised my hand to my brow, fingers sharp, wrist straight. Salute crisp enough to slice the afternoon stillness. I saluted not just the rank before me, but the future I had fought tooth and bone to earn. The brass band paused, the air stilled. For a single heartbeat, pride filled every space inside my chest, like breath finally reaching a place long starved. And somewhere behind me, my father scoffed, worthless. But his voice did not penetrate. Not this time. My hand held steady, my eyes locked forward. Pride was louder than him now. Pride was a drumbeat he could not silence. I felt tension in the air, a stretching wire waiting to snap, heat thick, like the world paused just for us. This was the edge before impact, the inhale before explosion, the moment the whole story balanced on. And I did not blink. I did not waver. I stood calm in the furnace, knowing storms always come before crowns. We were seconds from the shatter point. I felt it rising behind me like thunder chasing light. The moment before everything fell apart. The moment before the world saw who my father really was. And who I had become despite him. The moment I dropped my salute to Colonel Hayes, time felt suspended in the heavy Georgia heat, applause just beginning to ripple like a soft wave across the field, pride swelling in my chest like the sun itself had lit inside me. I barely had a heartbeat to breathe in the realization that I had crossed the threshold from cadet to officer, that everything I had endured was not for nothing when I saw Harold stand so abruptly, his folding chair scraped across concrete with a sound that cut through ceremony silence sharper than any rifle crack. His voice exploded before I even turned, booming across rows of stunned families and decorated soldiers. "She doesn't deserve this. She's not worthy. She thinks wearing a uniform makes her somebody." I heard gasps, but my feet stayed rooted, one hand still at my side, the other lowering from salute. my mind trying to catch up to the nightmare unfolding in front of hundreds of people who had come to witness honor, not humiliation. His boots slammed against the pavement as he stormed forward, face flushed crimson rage twisting his features into something animal. And for one frozen second, I believed he would stop, that somewhere buried, deep inside, was a shred of decency for this one sacred moment. But Harold never paused when anger guided him. He reached me in 3 long strides, grabbed my right arm where my salute had only just been, and before I could register anything past the shock of his touch on ceremonial ground, his fingers dug into my wrist and twisted with the violent precision of someone who wanted not just to hurt, but to break. The sound came first. A sharp, sickening snap, crisp as dry wood splitting, echoing across the field with such brutal clarity it felt like the world itself flinched. Pain shot up my arm like lightning, igniting every nerve, knocking breath from my lungs, collapsing the ceremony into a single blinding burst of agony as my knees buckled and the ground rushed toward me. I tasted dirt and metal, my vision spotting white ears ringing as if artillery had gone off beside my skull. Voices blurred into chaos, but one scream cut through when my face lifted just enough to see Marla standing hand over her chest in an exaggerated gasp. "She isn't hurt!" she shrieked, voice sharp and venomous. "She's performing for attention just like always." The disbelief from the crowd turned to outrage, instantly murmurs rising like a tide, turning violent. Somewhere above me, I heard Tyler's smug laugh and saw the gleam of his phone camera raised not in concern but in triumph, recording my collapse as if he were capturing proof of weakness to wave like a trophy later. My breath came jagged as fire consumed my wrist, my uniform sleeve tightening against swelling skin. Tears stinging without falling because I refused to cry here. Not in front of them, not in front of him. Harold leaned down, voice low and shaking with fury. "Look at you thinking you belong here, thinking you're more than what you came from." His words tasted like every hallway I ever hid in, every punishment, every night he told me I was nothing. My body trembled, but inside, something ancient and fierce pushed back against the shame closing in. Before I could speak, a force shifted beside us like gravity had suddenly chosen a side. Colonel Hayes stepped between Harold and me with a speed that belied his years, placing himself as a shield, one hand steadying my shoulder as I struggled to breathe. His voice was ice over steel command presence, filling the air that is a United States Army officer. And then came the roar that cracked whatever spell of horror held the crowd hostage. General Whitaker's voice thundered from behind us, sharp enough to slice the air clean. "Sergeant, arrest him. Now!" In an instant, military police moved boots pounding like judgment across concrete handcuffs already in their grip. Families gasped, veterans leaned forward in fury, and a woman in the front row covered her mouth, tears streaking as she whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Harold froze mid-breath, shock replacing rage, but it was too late. The MPs seized him, his wrists wrenched behind his back in the same gesture he'd used on mine seconds earlier. He fought at first, sputtering excuses. "I'm her father." She embarrassed me. She needed to be brought down to earth. But even the most sympathetic faces turned hard as stone. Soldiers do not tolerate attacks on their own. And here there was no hiding. No twisting the truth. No dark kitchen where he controlled the story. This time, the world was watching. The band had stopped, the flags stilled, and every eye bore into the scene like the nation itself had paused to witness reckoning. I tried to rise but collapsed again, pain blurring my vision, Hayes catching me before I hit the ground fully. "Easy, Lieutenant," he murmured, voice steady strong. "You hold steady now we've got you." The title, Lieutenant, cracked something inside me more than the bone had a reminder of who I was, not who he tried to keep me. Marla shrieked again as the MPs dragged Harold upright. "This is abuse," she yelled. "We are her family. She's ungrateful. She provoked him." The crowd erupted a chorus of disgust, rippling through rows of uniforms and patriots. A Vietnam veteran, medals heavy against his chest, spat at the ground in front of them. "You shame every parent who's buried a child in this soil." Tyler's phone lowered, his smirk fading as he realized this wasn't scandal he could control, but public condemnation burning hotter than the Georgia sun. I swayed, clutching my arm to my chest, pain crashing in waves, but something stronger rising underneath something I had not felt fully until this instant. Freedom. A lifetime of whispered hurt exploded into daylight, and the people around me did not laugh or ignore or blame me. They rose to defend. Their outrage wasn't mine to hide anymore. It was his to own. The soldiers surrounding drew tighter, forming a wall. I never knew I deserved faces carved with disgust for the man who tried to shatter his own daughter's moment of honor. An older woman in uniform knelt beside me, tissue shaking in her hand. "You don't cry here, sweetheart. You stand when you're ready." And I realized this wasn't humiliation. It was exposure. His exposure. The crowd wasn't mourning my weakness. They were witnessing his. I had spent a lifetime bracing for shame, but this time, shame did not land on me. It rolled off and crashed back onto him like a tide, reclaiming every ounce of cruelty he ever hurled. As they pulled Harold toward the edge of the parade field, struggling against cuffs and consequence, the band did not play. The flags did not wave, and the ceremony did not move on. Everything stopped. The world paused to name truth. He hadn't broken me. He'd revealed himself. And I knew, even through tears I refused to let fall, this was not the end. This was the beginning of the reckoning. The sound of the handcuffs closing around Harold's wrists was sharper than the crack of my bone, a cold metallic punctuation mark cutting through the heavy Georgia heat and sealing a truth I had spent my whole life suffocating under. The MPs pulled him upright, his body jerking in disbelief, eyes wide as if the universe itself had betrayed him for once, instead of bending around his rage. For a second he looked small, not the towering threat of my childhood, but a man suddenly stripped of illusion of power of the shadows he used to hide his cruelty. People rose from their seats in waves, the murmur turning into a rumble and then into a chant that shook the parade ground like thunder rolling from every direction. Shame, shame, shame. It echoed through the field, bouncing off flags and proud shoulders, and the brass glint of medals pinned over hearts that understood sacrifice, honor, loyalty. My breath hitched, vision swimming not from pain this time, but from something heavier. Something that felt like release after years of holding my lungs hostage. A Vietnam veteran near the front row leaned on his cane spit, hitting the concrete at Harold's feet with the disgust of a soldier who had seen real loyalty tested in jungles far from here. "Coward," he growled, voice shaking with fury earned in blood and years. I had never seen anyone call my father what he truly was in public before. It felt like a door unlocking inside my chest. The crowd wasn't split. There was no confusion. No, maybe she's exaggerating, no polite turning away. They saw him fully, finally, without the mask he wore in grocery stores and church pews, and in their eyes, I saw validation I had never dared to expect. Worthiness. Solidarity. Truth. My knees threatened to fold again, not from physical weakness, but from the overwhelming rush of years of swallowed humiliation finally finding air. I felt a hand steadying my shoulder, firm, grounding, warm, and when I looked up, Colonel Hayes stood beside me, eyes blazing with a quiet fury that wasn't aimed at me, but for me. His voice was calm, yet heavy, like each word carried weight meant to anchor me in this moment. "You stood longer than most ever could, Lieutenant. Longer than anyone had a right to ask of you." The title, the respect, the presence of someone who saw through me without doubting me made my throat tighten as I nodded, unable to speak past the pain and relief tangled in my chest. Tears slipped down my face before I could stop them. Not tears of pain, tears of release. Tears for the little girl who thought silence was survival. Tears for the cadet who trained in the dark so no one would see her fear shake her fingers. Tears for the woman who had just watched her abuser finally lose control in public instead of behind a closed door. I wasn't breaking. I was breathing. Deeply. Freely. For the first time. Marla was shouting something from the crowd, wild and frantic words, sharp and shrill, like she was the injured one. "This is a misunderstanding. Let him go. This is family business." But the audience only stared, jaws, hard eyes, unflinching. A woman in uniform 2 rows up lifted her chin and called back, "Family doesn't hurt their own on their proudest day." A cheer rose behind her, not loud like celebration, but steady, like the sound of something righteous taking shape. A collective heartbeat, choosing truth over sympathy for a bully. I turned just as the MPs began leading Harold off the field. His boots scraping against pavement shoulders, slumped humiliation written in the sag of his neck. He still tried one last time to twist the narrative voice cracking as he shouted, "She made me do it. She disrespected me. She thinks she's better than her own father." But no one moved. No one pitied him. The world had finally stopped believing him. And for the first time in my life, I did not flinch at his voice. His power over me dissolved with those handcuffs. The weight he put on my shoulders didn't crush me. It slid off like armor I no longer needed. I felt Mia and James rushing toward me, breathless and wide-eyed, hovering unsure if touching me would hurt faces carved with anger for me, not pity. "You tell us who to fight and we will," James muttered under his breath, half joking, but not really. I actually laughed, a shaky, quiet sound that felt foreign and new. I didn't need anyone to fight him. He had destroyed himself. The ceremony had paused, but the flag still flew over us, bright and steady, the brass band silent but ready to rise again. I wiped my face with the back of my good hand and stood straighter. My wrist throbbed, but my spine felt unbreakable. Colonel Hayes watched me with a look I didn't understand fully until later. Pride mixed with sorrow, the kind reserved for soldiers who survived battles no one trained them for. "This isn't how your day was supposed to go," he murmured. I swallowed hard. Voice soft but clear. "No, sir. But maybe it's how it needed to." Around us, whispers softened into stillness. Not judgment, but reverence. No one looked away. They witnessed. They believed. My humiliation didn't define me. It revealed him. And that revelation was victory disguised as pain. I stood under the sun, cast heavy around my wrist, sweat drying on my brow, and I realized something I never thought I would feel. I was not alone. Not anymore. The world had seen what I had carried, and instead of turning from it, they rose around me like a wall, like a shield, like a promise that everything he broke in secret would now be rebuilt in the light. I lifted my chin to the sky, breath steady. I was an officer now. And no one could take that from me, not even him. The ambulance ride to Walter Reed National Military Medical Center blurred into flashes of pain and ceiling lights racing above me, each pulse of brightness matching the throbbing in my wrist, sharp enough to send waves of nausea rolling through my stomach. I stared at the white band strapped around my arm, trying to steady my breath. Trying to hold on to the image of the flag and Colonel Hayes's voice telling me I stood longer than most ever could. That memory was the only thing keeping the room from spinning. At Walter Reed, the sterile smell of antiseptic wrapped around me like a cold blanket as doctors spoke words that felt distant at first. Fracture displacement, swelling, possible surgery, immobilization. When they maneuvered my wrist to set the bones, the pain was so bright I bit my lip until I tasted blood. It was nothing like the quiet pain of childhood, the pain I learned to hide. This pain was loud and undeniable, visible, treated seriously. The cast they placed around my arm settled heavy, unforgiving, but in a way almost comforting, a physical reminder that what happened was real and seen and tended to, not brushed aside or hidden in the dark. I lay in the hospital bed, still in my dress uniform jacket, draped over a chair sleeve cut away where paramedics had to access my arm. A nurse with soft eyes tucked a blanket around me and whispered, "You're safe here, honey." 3 words I had waited my whole life to hear. Sleep came jagged, broken by flashes of the ceremony, the snap of bone, the crowd rising like a wave behind me. When I opened my eyes again, a TV mounted on the wall flickered with the Fox 5 Atlanta logo, and my own face, pale and stunned, captured mid-collapse. The headline scrolled in bold across the bottom of the screen. "Father assaults newly commissioned Army officer at ceremony." My breath caught a strange mix of disbelief and a dawning sense of justice warming through my chest. The reporter's voice carried a tone of controlled outrage, the kind reserved for stories that hit something sacred in the American heart. Witnesses say the father rushed the stage during the oath ceremony and violently grabbed the officer, resulting in a severe wrist fracture. The image switched to Harold being taken away in cuffs, eyes wild, and mouth open mid-shout. For years, I feared no one would ever believe what he was capable of. Now the entire country could see. The anchor continued. Online response has been swift, with the hashtag #StandWithAvery trending nationwide within hours. My phone, resting on the bedside table, was buzzing non-stop. When I picked it up, messages flooded the screen, some from people I knew, many from strangers, veterans, officers, mothers, fathers, people who knew what it meant to protect, to sacrifice, to watch someone try to take pride away from their own child. You deserve better. Proud of you, Lieutenant. Your strength is seen. Stay strong. I found myself crying again, but this time the tears were soft, gentle, falling like they had been waiting years for permission. I scrolled until my thumb trembled, then paused when I saw a clip circulating already. General Whitaker ordering the arrest, the crowd rising the boom of "Sergeant, arrest him now." The comments beneath were a chorus of outrage and support, people writing about daughters in uniform, sons who never made it home, parents who would give anything to see their child stand proud in service. One older veteran wrote, "If anyone laid a hand on my daughter in uniform, I'd drag them off that field myself." Something inside me settled reading that, like the world had finally tipped in the right direction. Then, like poison seeping under a door, another headline popped up from a local Savannah outlet quoting Harold's lawyer. "She provoked him. She has always been difficult." The kind of line meant to twist blame like a knife. The room felt colder. That tactic blamed the victim, paint her emotional, hysterical, ungrateful. It was the same script he used my whole life. But this time, the public didn't swallow it. Comments tore it apart instantly. Shame on him. Provoked him to what? Losing control of his ego. She served her country, he served himself. A retired Marine wrote, "You don't touch an officer in uniform. Ever. You don't touch your child's pride. Ever." The support came like a shield. I didn't know I could have Americans from all walks sending lines of defense in words and prayers and stories of their own battles. My wrist ached deeply, but inside, something stronger was stitching itself back together. Colonel Hayes walked into the room, not long after, his silhouette unmistakable, even before he stepped fully into the light. He held a folder under his arm and a softness in his eyes that made me sit up straighter, despite the weight of fatigue pulling at my bones. He took the chair beside my bed, his voice warm but firm. "You handled today with more grace than many seasoned officers could." I looked down at my cast, feeling both proud and fragile, and whispered, "I didn't feel graceful." "Pain doesn't erase grace," he replied. "Sometimes it reveals it." He stayed until visiting hours ended, telling me I did nothing wrong, reminding me that survival was strength, not shame. Hours later, alone again, I stared at the ceiling as monitors beeped softly warm hospital light, washing the room in calm. My wrist hurt with every heartbeat, a steady drum of reminder. But for once, pain did not feel like isolation. It felt like transition. The world had seen truth. And instead of shrinking, I felt myself expand into it. I had not broken that day. Something else had. The lie that I was ever small. Savannah County Court did not feel like the same city I left years earlier. Not the same marsh-laced air or Spanish moss swaying gently above cracked sidewalks. Not the same ghosts trailing my footsteps when I used to walk home small and unseen. This time, I walked through the courthouse doors with my uniform jacket pressed clean over a sling. My cast visible, my chin lifted not in defiance but in arrival. Word had spread across town faster than summer lightning. People lined the hallway outside the courtroom, some whispering, some shaking heads, a few nodding at me in quiet respect. It was not pity in their eyes. It was recognition, like they finally saw what I had carried. The courthouse smelled like old wood and paper soaked in decades of verdicts, and every footstep echoed sharp and steady as if the building wanted each moment recorded. When they called my case, I took my seat near the front. Harold sat across the aisle, hands cuffed face tight, jaw clenched like he was chewing regret and refusing to swallow it. Marla perched behind him, lips pinched, eyes darting like she was still searching for someone to blame besides the man she chose to defend for years. Tyler slouched 2 seats down, chin tucked, like he wished he were anywhere else, and yet his presence alone told me he wanted to witness either my collapse or his uncle's redemption. Neither would come. The judge entered robes, sweeping voice firm as he began reviewing the case. Assault on federal property, interference with a military ceremony, bodily harm. My heart thudded slow but strong. I had stood under more pressure than this. I had survived darker rooms. When they brought Harold to the stand, he puffed his chest like he was stepping onto a factory floor, not facing the consequences of his own hands. His lawyer, a thin man with eyes like polished stones, began his defense. Your Honor, emotions were high. This was a family matter that spiraled. He is a father. Harold lifted his cuffed hands slightly as if that alone should dissolve accountability. I am her father, he declared, voice loud as if volume could restore his power. The judge did not flinch. And you are still under arrest, he replied, voice clipped and cool. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom. My lungs opened a little wider. I felt the invisible weight of a lifetime of swallowed truths shift. Harold sputtered, tried again. She embarrassed me. She always pushed. She thinks she's better than us. The judge leaned forward slightly. Sir, this court is not here to validate your pride. This court is here to uphold the law. Marla let out a quiet gasp as though the judge had slapped her instead. My turn came. They called me to speak. I walked to the stand, slowly sling snug against my side heels, steady. I raised my good hand to swear in. My voice did not shake. I faced the judge, then turned slightly toward the room, toward him. My father, who once filled doorways like walls, who silenced rooms just by breathing heavy, who believed fear was respect and control was love. Not anymore. I read from the page in my uninjured hand, though I had memorized every word through nights staring at hospital ceilings and childhood ceilings before that. Blood gives you life. It does not give you ownership. Harold's jaw slackened, not from remorse, but shock that I dared speak truth without trembling. I continued. Being my father did not make you my protector. It made you responsible for the harm you caused, and you caused it willingly. You told me pain was discipline, but pain taught me something else. It taught me endurance, and endurance brought me here. This time in this room, my voice is not small. His lawyer attempted to interrupt Your Honor, but the judge held up a hand. Let her finish. So I did. I steadied my breath, feeling the courtroom lean in like a living thing. You hurt me in private for years, and the world did not see. But on the day I earned my commission, when I stepped into a future, I built myself, you tried to drag me back. You failed. The courtroom quiet felt holy. I looked straight at Harold. I am not ashamed of what happened. I am not afraid of you, and I do not owe you silence. My voice did not waver, not once. When I sat down, my cast throbbed, but my chest felt weightless open, like dawn breaking over the marshes outside. The judge exhaled slowly like he was grounding the room. His ruling came crisp and clear. No contact order. Mandatory counseling. Maximum misdemeanor penalty for domestic battery and federal property assault. 6 months jail. No early release. Marla gasped like her world shattered, fingers flying to her mouth. Tyler stared at the floor. Harold's face twisted not in sorrow but insult, like the world had dared defy him. The judge finished, voice firm as gavel steel. You are not the victim here. The only person who endangered family today was you. When the gavel hit, its echo traveled through my bones like a door closing on a life I no longer lived, a life I refused to return to. The bailiff led Harold away, his boots scraping like the ceremony floor, but this time no voices rose in his defense. As he passed, he snarled low, You'll regret this. But the threat fell flat, powerless like a match struck under water. I did not look away. Not anymore. For the first time, I saw him truly. Small. Cornered. Defeated not by force, but by truth. I left the courtroom into bright Savannah sunlight thick with humidity and jasmine, and it smelled like a place I used to survive in, not a place that owned me. A reporter asked how I felt. I answered simply free. My wrist ached, my future stretched wide, and for the first time in my life, my voice walked beside me, not behind me. I had not just survived him. I had reclaimed myself from him, and that was a victory no courtroom could give and no sentence could take. 6 months passed like a slow exhale, heavy at first, then lighter, as each day put more distance between me and the courthouse steps where I first walked out, truly free. I finished phase training, wore my bars without flinching when addressed as lieutenant, and slept through nights without jolting awake waiting for footsteps outside my door. I poured myself into my new post, into discipline and purpose and learning how to command without raising my voice the way he did, understanding power as steadiness, not fear. Autumn bled into winter. Leaves in Georgia browned, then fell, and back in Savannah, the echo of my father's name faded from conversations like a story people finally stopped needing to whisper about. Then the call came. Unknown number. I almost ignored it until I saw the Savannah area code, and for a moment my chest tightened old muscle memory trying to climb my ribs like a ghost refusing to leave. I answered. Silence first. Then a breath I recognized even before he spoke, thin and unsteady, stripped of the swagger that once filled entire rooms. Avery, he said, voice brittle like something cold that's been cracked. It's your father. My stomach stayed still. My heartbeat did not spike. Growth sometimes looks like nothing at all on the outside. After a beat, I said yes. He hesitated, then words spilled like a man finally drowning in a sea he once pretended he commanded. We lost the house. Marla's gone to her sister's. Tyler can't find work. The world's different now. Harder. I could hear him waiting for my reaction, searching for the familiar rustle of my fear, my guilt. But there was no panic left for him to feed on. I simply listened. He swallowed loud enough to carry through the line. I have nowhere to go. I need help. His voice cracked on the last word. I stared out the barracks window at soldiers running PT in the distance, breath fogging in the cool morning air, cadence drifting like strength carried on wind. Need help. Years of forced silence curled inside me, then unfurled like steel. I asked quietly, "What do you want?" His answer came fast, desperate, like he thought speed could mask entitlement. Money. Maybe a place to stay a little while. Just until I get back on my feet. You're doing well now. You could help? You should help. That last line wasn't said outright, but it hung there like smoke from an old fire, familiar and choking. My fingers traced the edge of my sling, still strapped around my shoulder from rehab, a reminder carved into bone. I remembered him twisting my wrist with the same ease he once twisted my childhood. I remembered kneeling on rice the taste of dust when I fell at the ceremony, the cold quiet of hospital lights. I remembered the judge saying he was not the victim, and for a brief second compassion flickered, not for the man before me, but for the child I once was, the girl who would have given anything to hear him speak gently, even if the softness was selfish. Then the flicker died, replaced by something stronger. Boundaries, not walls. Gates I control. My voice came slow, steady, calm enough to scare the version of me he used to know. I will not save someone who used my blood to keep me on my knees. He sucked in a breath, shocked. You're really going to abandon your own father. I closed my eyes, inhaled, exhaled. You abandoned fatherhood long before I left that house. I do not owe you rescue for storms you built. The line went silent like he'd been punched. I waited. He broke first. Avery, please. His voice cracked open, trembling, weeping, the sound of a man finally facing consequences. Not because life was cruel, but because his cruelty burned every bridge beneath him. I let the silence stretch just long enough for truth to settle. Then I spoke softly, not angry, not spiteful, only final. I hope you find help, but it will not be from me. And I hung up, My hand shook not from doubt, but release. Mercy is not letting someone hurt you again. Mercy is walking away without turning back. I set the phone on my desk spine, straight breath steady. Outside, cadets ran in formation cadence, calling sharp and clear across the field. I was not the girl on the pantry floor. I was not the daughter kneeling to survive. I was a woman who stood on her own, and this time the only voice I listened to was mine. Fort Leonard Wood smelled like fresh-cut grass, new beginnings, and the kind of discipline that seeped into your skin and made you stand a little straighter, even when no one was watching. Training with the Military Police Corps was different than ROTC, not theoretical or preparatory, but real, tangible, heavy with responsibility. We rose before dawn, boots crunching over gravel in formation, breath turning to mist in the crisp Missouri mornings as cadence echoed off pine trees lining the base. My wrist still ached sometimes inside the lightweight support brace, but the ache felt more like a battle scar than a limitation, a reminder that bones heal and lives rebuild. The first time a junior soldier saluted me on instinct, sharp and proud, I returned it with a steadiness I didn't know lived inside me until that moment. It felt like stepping into my own skin fully for the first time. My name had traveled ahead of me, not as gossip, but as quiet respect whispered among recruits who heard what happened at Fort Benning and saw me not as broken, but unbreakable. Hayes appeared midway through field training, his familiar gait unmistakable before I even turned to see him. He wasn't scheduled to be on post, but there he stood in front of the motor pool, hands behind his back, weathered face, warm with the sort of pride most children spend lifetimes chasing from their parents. He didn't say a grand speech or clap me on the back. Instead, he simply nodded and said, "Lieutenant Dawson, walking tall, I see." 3 words, simple, steady, and I felt the approval settle deep in my chest where doubt used to live. That night, I returned to the barracks to find a package on my bunk, no return address, but handwriting I knew better than my own. Inside were 2 handwritten letters. The first, from Mia, neat script, sharp humor, bleeding through the ink. "Proud of you doesn't even begin," she wrote, and then she added a line that made my throat tighten. "You survived home. The Army will be nothing after that." The second was from James, shorter, steadier like him. "You earned every step. Don't ever forget that people rise when you do." I pressed both letters between my hands like prayer cards and sat on the edge of my bed, breathing slow, letting the warmth flood places that once only held fear. Respect in uniform meant something. Respect from those who saw me fight my way here meant everything. Over weeks, routine carved comfort into my days. Range training patrol tactics report, writing riot control drills. I learned to give orders without raising my voice, letting confidence carry instead of force. And the more I grew, the more my story stopped being about surviving a father and started being about becoming an officer who led with empathy and steel intertwined. Then, one afternoon, while reviewing security procedures outside the training building, I saw her. A young female cadet, barely 19, red-eyed and rigid, clutching her phone like it was both lifeline and enemy. Her shoulders shook even though she stood at attention. I recognized that posture immediately, the fight to look composed while pain tried to drag you under. Quietly, I stepped closer. "You good soldier." My voice soft enough not to startle, firm enough to be a lifeline. She swallowed, glanced around like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to break. "Family trouble, ma'am," she whispered, eyes shining. They said, I'm disgracing them choosing this life." In that moment, I did not see her. I saw myself at 19, at 15, at 10, standing in a house that punished ambition and called it love, shrinking under a roof that cracked my ribs, one expectation at a time. I didn't touch her. Sometimes touch feels like control, but I stood beside her shoulder aligned with hers so she didn't feel small from looking up. "Listen," I said quietly. "I know what it feels like when the people who should have protected you try to cage you instead." Tears slipped despite her trying to blink them back. Her breath hitched. I lowered my voice further. "You do not owe pain your loyalty. You owe your future, your strength. And you are safe here." The last sentence came like instinct, like muscle memory rewriting itself in real time. Her shoulders sagged just slightly, a quiet surrender, not to weakness, but to relief. "Yes, ma'am," she breathed, and something in her steadied. She saluted, then crisped despite shaking fingers, and I returned it with a softness that honored what she fought just to stand there. As she walked away, I realized healing doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the act of giving someone else the comfort you once begged for. Every day after that, I carried myself a little differently. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Earned one boundary, one breath, one act of kindness at a time. Soldiers saluted me not because of a rank stitched on fabric, but because I had become someone steady enough to receive it. Someone who understood breaking without letting it define me. Someone who learned that building others is the final step in rebuilding yourself. Fort Leonard Wood wasn't just where I trained. It was where I transformed, where strength stopped being a shield and started being an offering, where my story stopped being about escape and became about arrival, where I learned the most profound truth of all: survival is powerful, but lifting someone else while you rise, that is the kind of strength that lasts. Arlington National Cemetery felt like a held breath the moment I stepped through its gates. Rows of white headstones stretching in perfect formation across rolling green, each one a life, a story, a sacrifice sealed into stone and memory. The air carried a quiet reverence here, not heavy but purposeful, like the land itself remembered every footstep that passed and weighed them gently. My boots moved slowly over gravel paths, the sling long gone. Now my wrist healed, though I could still feel the echo of that day in the bones, sometimes like a reminder whispered through marrow. Washington air was crisp, tinged with the scent of grass and history flags rippling softly in a breeze that seemed to speak in hushed tones. I walked past resting places of soldiers who fell in lands far from here, men and women who once stood where I stood, saluted where I saluted, carried burdens I could only imagine. Each headstone stood equal in height, equal in dignity, the only true equality earned and honored by service. For a moment, I let myself breathe deeply, letting quiet fill me in places noise once lived, letting peace settle into corners fear used to occupy. I did not come here for ceremony. I came for closure, for grounding, for gratitude. And for him, the Medal of Honor recipient, whose grave I had sought for weeks, tracing archives and military rosters until I found the name and location. He fought in the Pacific in 1945, a young man who charged through gunfire to drag wounded soldiers to safety, refusing to leave even when wounded himself. They said he never spoke much about that day after the war. They said he returned home quietly, lived modestly, never boasted. They said he served, then lived, then was buried here. The world's noise never drowning the truth of who he had been. I did not know him personally, but his spirit was part of the ceremony where I stood tall, where I saluted with pride just before my father tried to tear it all away. He represented something pure and unshakable: honor, not as a word, but as a life lived. And when I found his grave simple and dignified beneath a mapled shadow, I stood at attention and saluted crisp and slow, letting every second of it mean something. My voice stayed silent, but my heart spoke loud enough to fill the space between us. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like without cruelty. Thank you for proving dignity is not loud. Thank you for existing before I was born, so that I had someone real to look up to when the world at home tried to convince me heroes were make-believe. The breeze tugged gently at my sleeve, and I lowered my hand, exhaling not out of sadness, but release. Footsteps approached behind me, measured familiar. General Whitaker stood there, hands clasped behind his back, uniform, immaculate presence, steady as granite but warm as sunlight breaking through clouds. He did not speak at first. He simply stood beside me, looking at the same stone, the same history, the same truth. Then, quietly, soft enough that it felt like a message more than a sentence, he said, "Some families are chosen by blood. Others are earned by sacrifice." I felt the words settle in my chest like they had always belonged there, waiting for someone to say them aloud so I could finally hear what my heart had known for years. My father gave me life but not love. My tormentor shared my name, not my values. Blood tied us biologically, not spiritually. But the army, the people who stood beside me in formation, who caught me when I fell, who saluted me not because of obligation but respect, They were family born not of ancestry, but allegiance earned in silence and pain and rising. I looked at the headstone again, feeling grief and gratitude and strength braid together in a way that felt sacred. "I choose mine," I said. My voice was quiet but unwavering, every syllable anchored. "I choose the people who lift me. I choose the ones who protect without demanding obedience. I choose those who stand with me on clear days and stormed fields alike. I choose my future, not my past." Whitaker's eyes softened pride, flickering like a steady flame. "That is the oath behind the oath, Lieutenant," he said. "We serve the nation, but we also serve each other. We build the family we deserve when fate refuses to give it." A breeze rustled through the leaves, whispering like a gentle applause from lives long past. I felt something inside me loosen completely, like the last thread connecting me to fear finally snapped. My father had been part of my story, but not its definition. Pain had built my strength, but it would not write my ending. I stood there as a daughter no longer defined by blood, but by choice, by loyalty freely given, not demanded by honor earned without hurting others. The moment stretched wide and full, like the world paused to mark it. I imagined the little girl I used to be standing beside me, hands no longer trembling, eyes no longer searching for permission to exist. I imagined her seeing who we became. Strong, whole, chosen by those who mattered. When I finally stepped back, Whitaker nodded once, as if acknowledging the completion of something sacred. I did not need forgiveness from the past. I did not need apology. I had truth. I had dignity. And I had chosen my family. As we walked away from the grave, sunlight filtered through branches and landed on the marble like a quiet blessing. My future stretched ahead, like the long white rows of markers full of legacy shaped by sacrifice grounded in belonging. I did not mourn what I lost. I honored what I gained. And with each step, the old wounds faded, leaving strength in their place. I came here seeking closure. I left with something far more powerful: peace. Fort Liberty greeted me not with fanfare, but with the quiet hum of soldiers already moving through morning routines, their silhouettes crisp against dawn that painted the sky in soft pinks and golds. The Carolina air carried a different weight than Georgia's lighter cleaner threaded with pine, and the promise of seasons that changed without asking permission. The base stretched wide, organized, and humming ribbons of roads and barracks and training fields rolling over gentle hills like the world had laid itself out flat so warriors could learn to stand tall. The moving truck rumbled away, dust settling behind it as if sealing off every chapter that came before. My bag sat by my boots uniform collar crisp against my neck, and for the first time in my life, standing somewhere new did not feel like running. It felt like arriving. My assignment packet rested tucked under my arm, and instead of fear curling in my stomach, there was a steady warmth, a grounded certainty that I had earned every inch of this ground. This wasn't escape. This was beginning. On my second day, I visited the Canine Retirement Program on base, half expecting to just walk through and pay respects. But fate has a way of placing family in our path when blood has none left to offer. He sat in the corner of the kennel, larger than life, even lying down thick gray fur around his muzzle, and eyes that held storms and calm in equal measure. His tag read, Brutus. Military working dog. Retired. Combat trainer's note clipped to the gate. Loyal. Protective. Needs gentle leadership. The handler looked at me, then at the dog, then back to me as if the universe whispered the same thing in both our ears. "He's seen a lot," the handler said quietly. "Trust may come slow." I crouched, met Brutus's gaze. I know something about slow trust. His ears twitched, not quite a wag, not quite suspicion, something in between. When they handed me his leash, it felt less like ownership and more like two soldiers agreeing to walk out of war together. Back at my new on-base housing, Brutus paced the living room once, then settled at my feet like he'd been waiting years for this exact floor. That night, I sat on the small porch, Brutus's head resting heavy on my boot, and watched soldiers jog in formation, cadence floating warm through dusk. They weren't strangers. They weren't threats. They were my people, and I was theirs, not because I needed belonging, but because I had finally learned I deserved it. Brutus huffed, nudging my knee. I scratched behind his ear. "We're home now," I whispered. The days found rhythm quickly, early morning PT, policing briefs, leadership drills, quiet cups of coffee before the world fully woke. I walked through the company office and soldiers greeted me with nods that held respect, not obligation. When I walked base streets, sunlight warming my shoulders, passing NCOs offered morning ma'ams with sincerity. I still flinched sometimes, not from fear, but from awe. Growing into safety after a lifetime of bracing for impact feels like learning to walk again. One afternoon, a private fresh from basic training bumped into me eyes wide as she realized she had collided with a lieutenant. She stammered apology after apology, cheeks flushing. I placed a calm hand on her shoulder, smiled just enough, and said, "Breathe, soldier, you're allowed to take up space here." She blinked, then breathed, shoulders loosening like someone had unlatched a weight. That used to be me, and now I was the one handing steadiness forward. Evenings became sacred. Walks with Brutus along the fence line, the setting sun catching flags and painted stripes on hangers, wind rustling through tall grass like quiet applause. Sometimes I would stop on the hill overlooking the base boots, planted strong chin up, breathing deep, the kind of air you only notice when you're finally allowed to exhale. There were still pangs, memories like ghosts tapping glass, but pain didn't own me anymore. It informed me. Strength didn't roar. It pulsed, steady beneath my ribs, quiet as heartbeat, relentless as dawn. One morning, a few weeks after settling in, I woke before sunrise without alarm. Brutus lifted his head tail, thumping once before settling again. I laced my boots, stepped outside, just as the horizon cracked open with first light, painting everything in gold and fire. Soldiers moved across the field in the distance, silhouettes rising and pacing steady another day, beginning in service of something more than ourselves. The flag lifted in the breeze, catching color and wind, and for a moment the world stilled as if honoring something private and sacred. I closed my eyes and let the air fill me the way I could never breathe fully in that old house, the way breath had always caught in my throat when footsteps thundered down hallways. Here, no footsteps chased me. Here, nothing hunted me. Here I stood because I chose to, not because fear held me upright. The sun crested warmth spreading across the base like blessing. I opened my eyes, lifted my chin, and whispered truth to the wind, not as a declaration, but as acknowledgement of a life reclaimed. I didn't lose a father. I lost a jailer. And I gained a future. When a story ends in strength, there is often a quiet moment afterward where the world feels still almost sacred, like breath settling after a long run. If you are here watching the sunrise with me in this final scene, know this truth first. Survival is not loud. It does not always look like shouting victories or dramatic triumph. Sometimes survival is choosing to wake up again. Sometimes it is feeding a dog who trusts you because you learned to trust yourself. Sometimes it is simply standing in the light after years spent shrinking in the shadows someone else built. If someone in your life ever tried to dim your light because it reminded them of everything they refused to become, I hope you hear me now. Your worth was never theirs to measure. Your courage was never theirs to judge. And the strength it took to stay alive in a place that tried to break you is a strength they will never understand. There is a quiet kind of bravery in walking away from the people who taught you pain and calling that choice freedom instead of guilt. There is dignity in choosing peace over permission. There is honor in deciding that your life does not have to be spent apologizing for existing. Maybe your battle was not fought in uniform. Maybe it was fought at a kitchen table where voices rose and respect never did. Maybe it was fought behind closed doors where no one clapped when you survived the night. Or maybe your battlefield was a childhood bedroom where silence was the only armor you had. I want you to know something I did not know for a long time. Breaking away from those who harm you is not betrayal. It is self-rescue. It is reclaiming breath. It is choosing to live instead of simply enduring. And it is okay if that decision took you years. It is okay if your voice shook the first time you said no. It is okay if you are still learning how to feel safe in your own skin. Strength is not measured by how clean the journey looks. Strength is measured by the fact you are still here. If you have ever felt alone in that journey, I hope this story reminded you that isolation is a lie. Pain whispers to keep you trapped. You are not alone. Many of us walked through fire disguised as family. Many of us learned love from those who never knew how to give it. Many of us built ourselves from pieces no one helped pick up. And yet here we stand, you and me, breathing, healing, beginning again. If you carried yourself through your own battle, if you built peace, brick by brick, with hands that once only knew how to shield this space, honors you. If you are still in the middle of it, finding small moments of courage 1 hour at a time, this space sees you too. And if you escaped and now struggle with the quiet after chaos, wondering who you are without pain as your map, let me tell you this. You are more than what you survived. You are more than what they called you. You are more than the version of yourself you became to stay safe. And not one moment of that journey was wasted, even if it hurt, especially if it hurt. You do not owe loyalty to someone who used love as a cage. You do not owe silence to someone who mistook your fear for obedience. You do not owe forgiveness if it costs you your peace. You owe yourself freedom. You owe yourself breath. You owe yourself gentleness. Tonight, before you scroll away, before life rushes back in, take one quiet moment to honor the parts of you that refused to quit. And if you feel moved to share a piece of your strength below, you never know who might read it and decide to stay another day. Tell me where you are watching from. I know many of you are here from small towns, military bases, farms, church pews, quiet suburbs, big cities where hope sometimes gets lost in the noise. Wherever you are, drop your state, your town, your flag, your journey. And to the veterans and military families here, I see you. Your service does not end with uniform. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought at home in hearts and histories and memories that do not fade as easily as scars do. If this story touched something in you, breathe with it, sit with it, then pass strength forward in the comments for someone who still needs it. And remember this. You are not alone. You are not forgotten, and your story is not over just because someone tried to end it too soon. This world is wide. Your light deserves room to grow. Drop a comment. Share where you are watching from. Tell us what resilience means to you. And above all, keep walking. Your future is calling your name.